Karl Bushby left the southern tip of Chile on November 1st, 1998, with $500 in his pocket, a backpack on his shoulders, and a goal that every single person who heard about it told him was impossible. Not part of the world, not most of the world, the entire world. Every single kilometer on foot, an unbroken path of footsteps stretching across continents, oceans, and some of the most dangerous and inhospitable terrain on the face of the earth. He called it the Goliath expedition, and he told people it would take about 8 years. That was 27 years ago, and Karl Bushby is still walking. This is the king of all survival stories, and it is not even finished yet. Before we talk about the journey itself, you need to understand who Karl Bushby is and why this story is so different from every other extreme adventure you have ever heard about. Karl was born in Hull, England in 1969 and grew up in a military family. He joined the British Army at just 16 years old and served for 11 years as a paratrooper in the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment. He was disciplined, tough, and trained to endure conditions that would break most people. But even with all of that military training, he spent most of his Army career waiting around and never really going anywhere meaningful. At some point during those 11 years, he started drawing lines on maps and daydreaming about crossing vast distances across the globe. One idea led to another, and eventually one very specific idea took hold and refused to let go. Was going to walk around the entire world, and he was going to do it without any help from any form of transportation whatsoever. The rules he set for himself were brutally simple. He could only walk or swim. He could not go home to Hull, England until he arrived there entirely on foot. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no cheating, just footsteps from one end of the earth to the other. He started in Punta Arenas, Chile, which sits near the very southern tip of South America, making it one of the southernmost cities on the planet. He began walking north through Argentina, through Peru, through Ecuador, and through Colombia with a small wheeled trailer behind him carrying his supplies. The South American leg of the journey was already incredibly demanding, covering thousands of kilometers through mountain ranges and jungle in extreme heat and cold. But it was when he reached Colombia that things took a genuinely life-threatening turn. When he reached Panama in February 2001, after successfully crossing that deadly jungle, he was immediately arrested and thrown in jail for 18 days because he had entered the country without a valid entry visa at an unofficial crossing point. He had just survived one of the most dangerous pieces of terrain on Earth, and the first thing that happened when he came out the other side was handcuffs and a jail cell. He spent 18 days in a prison in Matete, Panama, before eventually being released and allowed to continue walking north through Central America and into Mexico. In 2008, he ran completely out of funding while in Mexico and had to pause the entire expedition for 2 full years, waiting and working to raise enough money to carry on. 2 years sitting still after years of walking, knowing that the moment he stopped moving, the unbroken chain of footsteps he had been building since 1998 was just waiting for him to pick it back up. He eventually continued north through the United States, and the American leg of the journey brought its own chaos. On New Year's Day 2003, just 1 day away from crossing into Canada, his trailer was stolen from outside a bar in Montana. Everything he carried for survival was gone in one night. He spent the next month replacing all of it piece by piece. Then, just as he was about to leave the United States and resume the walk, the stolen trailer was found in a quarry nearby. By 2006, he had walked over 17,000 miles, covering the entire length of South America, Central America, and Arth America. He had walked through jungles, deserts, mountain ranges, and frozen plains. He had survived guerrillas, jail thefts, and funding collapses, and he was only about a third of the way through the journey. The next stage of the expedition required Karl to cross the Bering Strait, which is the frozen body of water separating Alaska from Russia. This is not something any normal human being would ever attempt. The Bering Strait crossing involves walking across shifting sea ice in Arctic conditions with temperatures that can drop so far below zero that exposed skin freezes in minutes. Karl crossed this 240-kilometer stretch in 14 days, facing Arctic storms, extreme cold, and the very real possibility of falling through the ice into freezing water in the middle lee of nowhere with no rescue possible. He made it across alive, and when he stepped onto Russian soil after completing one of the most dangerous walks a human being has ever attempted, the Russian authorities arrested him immediately. Even though he had a valid visa, they told him the Bering Strait was not an official entry point into Russia and deported him back to the United Kingdom. He had just crossed a frozen Arctic Ocean on foot, and the response from the Russian government was a deportation order. It took intervention from British politician John Prescott and help from Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich before Karl finally received permission to re-enter Russia and continue walking. But Russia was not done making his life difficult. Russian visas only lasted 90 days at a time, meaning Karl had to leave the country repeatedly throughout the Russian portion of his journey. His route through Russia took him through areas that could only be traveled on foot via frozen rivers and ice roads, meaning he could only walk during the late winter and early spring each year. When the snow melted, the ground became impassable. Swamp and rivers he could not cross. So he would walk for a few months, use up his 90-day visa, via Russia, wait for the next visa, get it approved, and come back and do it again. In 2012, Russia denied him a visa entirely. In 2013, Russia banned him from re-entering the country for 5 years, citing a border violation from the previous year. 5 years. Karl Bushby had walked tens of thousands of kilometers across multiple continents to survive this. A Darien Gap crossed the Bering Strait on foot, and Russia banned him for 5 years over a technicality. When he finally got back into Russia and pushed through the Asian portion of the expedition, he reached Central Asia and hit another wall. Iran refused to grant him a visa, which meant the overland walking route through the Middle East was completely blocked. Any other person would have packed it in at this point. Karl Bushby looked at the map, found the Caspian Sea sitting between Central Asia and his route forward. A&D made a decision that is almost unbelievable. He decided to swim across it, not boat across it, not pay someone to take him across it, swim across it. The Caspian Sea is 288 kilometers wide. Karl spent 31 days swimming 6 hours per day using a small kayak alongside him to carry his supplies, crossing the Caspian Sea by swimming to keep the unbroken chain of his journey alive. He came out the other side, having just swum across the sea because a country would not give him a stamp in his passport. Throughout all of these years and all of these obstacles, Karl Bushby has spoken openly about what the journey has truly cost him beyond the physical suffering. He has said without any hesitation that the hardest thing he has dealt with over 27 years of walking is not the Arctic crossings, or the jungle, or the deportations, or the swims, or the hunger. The hardest thing has been losing the women he fell in love with along the way. When you're walking around the world with no fixed timeline and no ability to stop and stay in one place, relationships cannot survive. And Karl has watched that happen more than once. He has said that the physical pain of walking is easy compared to that. Pain is something the body handles. Loss is something else entirely. He has also spoken about what hunger does to the human mind. When you genuinely do not know where your next meal is coming from after walking man-wide miles in a remote area. He has described how, when you are truly hungry, your brain starts playing tricks on you, and every shadow and every rock starts to look like food, and you find yourself chasing hallucinations across the landscape looking for something to eat. That is a level of physical depletion that most people will never experience in their entire lives, and Karl Bushby has experienced it multiple times across multiple continents over nearly 3 decades. But what Karl has also said consistently throughout this journey is that one of the most powerful things he has learned about the world is how kind people actually are. Across every country, every culture, and every language barrier, Karl has been taken in by strangers who fed him, sheltered him, and helped him without asking for anything in return. People who could not speak a single word of English would bring him inside their homes, feed him a meal, give him a place to sleep, and send him on his way the next morning with a smile. He has said the world is a far friendlier and far kinder place than it appears from the outside, and that is a lesson he has learned by actually walking through it, rather than reading about it or watching it on a screen. After 27 years, Karl Bushby has walked more than 47,000 kilometers. He is now in Europe and has only about 3,000 kilometers remaining. The final challenge, standing between him and completing the greatest walk in human history, is the English Channel. Walking through the Channel Tunnel is normally forbidden because of the high-speed trains that run through it, and Karl may need special permission to use the emergency service tunnel to make his crossing. If that permission comes through, Karl Bushby is expected to complete the Goliath expedition and arrive home in Hull, England by 2026 after walking 58,000 kilometers in total. That is approximately 1.5 times the circumference of the entire Earth traveled entirely on foot over 27 years. Think about what that number actually represents for a moment. Karl Bushby started this walk when he was 29 years old. He is now in his mid-50s. He has spent more than half of his adult life walking. He has been arrested, deported, jailed, stranded, starved, frozen, nearly killed in a guerrilla-controlled jungle, and banned from entire countries. He has swum across a sea and crossed a frozen Arctic Ocean on foot. He has run out of money, watched relationships end from across continents, and spent years fighting bureaucracy and governments just for the right to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And through every single one of those obstacles, he kept walking. What Karl Bushby is doing is not just the greatest walk in human history. It is one of the greatest demonstrations of human determination that has ever been documented on this planet. He set out to do something that everyone said was impossible, and 27 years later he is a few thousand kilometers from proving every single one of those people wrong. He did not need perfect conditions. He did not need everything to go according to plan. He needed a goal that mattered more than every obstacle between him and it, and he kept moving toward that goal for 27 straight years, regardless of what the world threw at him. The next time something gets in the way of something you're trying to build or reach or finish, remember that there is a man out there right now who has been walking since 1998 and has not stopped yet. Karl Bushby is almost home.